Summit. My name is Natalia Krasta, if we haven't met before. Just a couple of notes before we proceed with the session. If you haven't yet, please download AWS Summit app, and you can use it to provide the feedback about the sessions you've attended, including this one. Please have your mobile phone silent to provide an uninterrupted experience for everyone. Your headsets have volume setting. If you would like to adjust the sound, please feel free to do it. And once you're done with the session, please leave the headsets on your seats before you exit the room. All of our sessions today are being live streamed and recorded, and you will have access to them after the event. So for our final session, let's do something interactive. Can you please take a moment and turn to a person next to you who you haven't spoken today yet, and share your biggest insight or your highlight from this day of learning, or 2 days if you've attended yesterday as well. Just take 30 seconds each and we'll proceed shortly. Just a few more moments. Okay, I think most of you are back now. Thank you for sharing. I hope you had some insightful takeaways from this event. We're about to start our session now. Stay here and join this session if you need help with understanding and framing ROI for generative AI use cases. This is a level 200 session. Please welcome Olivier Debaillon to the stage.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for spending these past 2 days with us, hearing from our customers, from you, from your peers, from our partners, from experts. It's really great to have you for these 2 days. My name is Olivier. I look after AI for financial services here in Australia and New Zealand. And today, the next half an hour, I'll help you to reframe and rethink business value and ROI in the age of generative AI. And let's start by going back. Let's go back a couple 100,000 years ago, and let's imagine that you are a cave person in a cave, in the dark, in the cold, and someone comes up to you and asks you, what is the value, what is the ROI of having electricity, of having heat, of having light at the flick of a button on demand? It's really hard for you to imagine that if you were back in the days in the cave, right? It would be hard for you to imagine the transformative impact of electricity, transforming how we live, how we work, how we communicate, how we govern, pretty much everything, right? And that's something that's in line with general purpose technologies. Technologies that permeate everything in society. And for these types of technologies, it's hard to really understand value. In fact, we have this conundrum, this paradox for these general purpose technologies. On the one hand, we have very ambitious, bold, top-down numbers. You might have seen this research from McKinsey. They estimate that generative AI alone will deliver $4 trillion in annual economic value every year. Closer to home here in Australia, the Tech Council of Australia estimates that generative AI will deliver about $100 to $150 billion in annual economic value. And to put these numbers in perspective, that's about 1% to 2% incremental productivity gains for Australia and for the world and our global workforce. So pretty impressive top-down numbers. But in the room, we all know that there's a wide gap, there's a wide difference between these top-down numbers and bottoms-up number, where in an organization working on a single use case, demonstrating ROI is still a top barrier that is often highlighted in the likes of Gartner. So to address this, I'll cover this equation. I'm a bit of a math nerd, but this is a very simple equation. And I'll build this out over the next couple, half an hour. And let's focus first on the return side of the equation. And the first observation that I want to share with you, and hopefully 2 days into this conference, it's no surprise now, there is real tangible value being delivered by AI today, both globally, but also locally. And I'll share a couple of examples locally to bring this to life. There's value across 4 main archetypes of use cases. And I'll start with the customer experience with NIB. NIB was on stage a couple of hours earlier with Matt Finch, the CDO. They've been on this journey with AWS. They launched the first chatbot in healthcare in 2017. They've invested, they've innovated, and they've delivered $22 million in savings using AI, now more recently generative AI, for their company. And one of the drivers of this was customer experience. It was helping to address customer cases, address customer questions faster. They have a 60% deflection rate on chat. So if you have a chat, and I don't know if you're like me, but I want to have an answer straight as fast as I can, that's been handled automatically in 60% of the cases. And through voice, it's a bit lower, it's about 15% now. Matt shared 10% earlier, and they're hoping to raise this using more natural language, speech-to-speech models like Amazon Novasonic. So that's the customer experience, a lot of value. The second archetype is around this broad concept of the employee experience, making all of us more productive. And one example of this is Orion Health, a healthcare software company based out of New Zealand. They wanted to reimagine their support operations. They built an intelligent search solution to bring together over 300,000 documents. Think of all the corpus of knowledge in the enterprise to help their frontline, their support engineers, solve for any question a lot faster. And what used to take them hours or days, they can now do in minutes, and on aggregate, about 20% productivity gains. The third major area, and that's a very, very common use case globally but also locally, is around the developer experience. It's about making developers faster, it's about shipping faster. What I like about the deputy example is that it really highlights how generative AI can be seen as a translator from English to my mother tongue French, from one framework to another. And Deputy, they have this workforce scheduling platform, and that requires translating natural language like English, sometimes legal jargon, into very precise rules on top of which they can run their algorithms. And using AI and generative AI, they can do this with 70% better efficiency. And the final one is around the data experience. And I think of this broadly as going from unstructured data to structured data to insights and ultimately to actions and outcomes, right? And you heard this morning from Australian Epilepsy Project in the keynote how they've revolutionized the space. And they've reduced the time for neurologist assessment by 70%. And that has real impact on real people, which we're really proud to support. So all of these numbers, I would argue, are quite impressive, right? And in fact, if you look at academic research, the estimate of productivity gains is in the order of 20 to 40%. But what this doesn't highlight is the variability. The fact that, for example, for the developer experience, one of our customers locally here saw anywhere between 30 to 90% efficiency gains. That's a quite wide range, right? And this is because it's a space that's moving very, very fast. And in this context, when something is moving really fast, there's a lot of value in learning by experimenting. So let's focus on this as we build out this equation. How fast is this space moving? You will have seen a lot of charts over the past couple of months and years, but one number that I follow closely that I think tells a good story is looking at the cost of compute. And you might have heard of Moore's Law, which loosely says, or can be interpreted as saying that the cost of compute is cut by half every, say, 18 to 24 months. And this is an empirical law, an observation that has held true for decades. Well, you look at this number in the context of generative AI, and that timeline has been compressed down to every 4 to 6 months. So what that means is every year you have an order of magnitude better cost profile. In this context, when things are moving so fast, there's a lot of value in learning, in being able to, with your stakeholders, understand your assumptions, understand what conviction you might have, and being able to iterate on those. We ran through a survey in October of last year with about 1,000 customers, and we asked them, how do you estimate ROI for your use cases within your business? And the first tranche of customers, 14%, did no estimation at all. They had enough conviction that on some low-hanging fruit, on some no regrets use cases, they could just go out and put them in production. And yes, there's value derived from those use cases, but also value in getting the company in shape. There's a second broad bucket of customers, about 2/3, the middle two sections here, where they did some form of analysis. Either some benchmarks looking at third-party reports, or looking at some more granular analysis looking at key assumptions. And then about 20%, 21% did a small-scale deployment, a pilot, to gain that extra confidence in the context of their organization. But for our customers, and for our most successful customers, this initial deployment, whether you call it a pilot or a proof of value or an experiment, is only the beginning of the journey. Our most successful customers are holding themselves accountable to those metrics and those KPIs, and making sure they deliver on the business value that was promised to the business. And this has two broad benefits. The first one is, maybe you're not there yet in your organization. Maybe you had a business case with some assumptions, and some turned out to be flawed. Maybe you're not getting enough enablement from your teams to adopt the technology and the tool. Maybe the accuracy is in there. Well, getting to the root cause can help you to close the gap and actually see the benefits. So that's one benefit. The other benefit is we're all learning here. And so by going through this process, by capturing why you're not succeeding, you can build this out into your process. And you can, for example, build out t-shirt sizes for future use cases. You can be more robust in your assumptions for future business cases, and that has inherent value. So that's one extra framing on the return. Then there's another one, which is some other sets of intangibles. And you might have heard today from the different sessions, a lot of the focus is still on productivity, on efficiency. There are some use cases that start to highlight the growth aspirations of organizations, incremental revenue, top line growth. But there's another set of intangibles that aren't really captured yet, and that's around risk reduction, and around risk mitigation. And these benefits can be very real. To highlight this, let me illustrate this with a historical example with Ford. Ford, early 20th century, revolutionized manufacturing and the assembly line. By using electricity, by using electrification, they could rethink the layout of their factories. They were no longer beholden to one single source of power, and so they could completely reimagine the process. And in doing so, a lot of tangible benefits, productivity, efficiency, absolutely. But there was another benefit on the risk side. Those factories used to be lit by gas, with gas lighting, and that meant the quality of the air was poorer, so that had an impact on worker safety and worker standard of living. And also it had higher risks of fires in these factories. So by switching from gas lighting to electric lighting, they were able to reduce the amount of money they paid to insurance companies, and that more than paid for the extra cost at the time of electricity. So let's bring this back to AI now. And how do we apply this lens of risk reduction on AI use cases? One of my favorite books is Noise by famed economist Kahneman and co-authors Sibony and Seinstein. And their premise is that humans are flawed. We are imperfect, we make mistakes, we are inconsistent. And our decisions are shaped by the noise in our minds more than by the signal in the information we receive. Well, if we look at your organizations today and how you manage risk, and I focus mainly on financial services companies, typically there are multiple lines of defense to account for the fact that we make mistakes, right? You might have a first line of defense with the business, second line of defense with your risk teams, third line of defense with your audit teams, and that is to catch these mistakes. But typically you only review a fraction of the process, a fraction of the calls, a fraction of the cases. Why? Because it's manual, because it's expensive. Well, by using AI, you can do that now on every process, on every case, on everything, to catch more mistakes, a net positive for your business. We run a lot of proof of values with our customers, and one of the first questions I ask is, what is your baseline? What does great look like? What is the ground truth data, where it's, yes, this is perfectly valid, it's accurate, and let's assess an AI-based solution, or any solution for that matter, against that baseline. Well, sometimes, even in financial services, we find mistakes. Whether it's in financial spread analysis, whether it's in mortgage assessment, whether it's in trade reconciliation, we find mistakes even as we do those proof of values. Why? Because we all make mistakes, right? And so the question for all of you is, well, what is the cost of these mistakes, of these inconsistencies in your business? Do you even know how many mistakes there are in your business? And what is that latent hidden risk associated with those mistakes? One of the side benefits of working on these types of problems as well is you work more closely with your risk and compliance teams, and you get to highlight what is the opportunity but also the challenge with some of these technologies to help educate and enable them along the way. And finally, there's a final risk, a business risk, and that is the risk of not moving, of not doing anything. We've all heard about Kodak. We've all heard about the proverbial story where Kodak actually invented the digital camera. They had the IP in-house, they knew it was coming, but they were in the film business. They had a lot of capital investments, and they weren't fast enough to shift to this new era. And eventually in 2012, they filed for bankruptcy protection. No one wants to be the next Kodak, but it's hard when we're in the middle of a massive transformation to recognize this and to move fast enough. In fact, as individual organizations within a broader industry, within a broader country and global system, we don't necessarily control how value pools are shifting in the industry. How much value will accrue to the end customer? Maybe a lot of the value created will end up with the end customer, with all of us in the room here. Or maybe a new entrant, an AI native entrant, will undercut some of your businesses. And so in some cases, leveraging AI, building out AI capabilities, features, might be a net new cost to the business, but might be a defensive play. One of our software customers here launched an AI coach as part of their offering for their customers. And that has a cost to their business, and they run foundation models, but they don't charge their end customers for it because they think it's table stakes now. And their CEO is too concerned and is too paranoid, in fact, about two people in a garage vibe coding the next version of their software solution. So a net new cost, but in the context of reducing risk and business risk, that might be a necessity. So I encourage you to apply this lens as you think about use cases and transformation with AI in your business. So we cover the top half of this equation, the return side of the equation, and looking beyond the hard quantifiable benefits at some other intangibles, including learning and other intangibles. Let's now address the second part of the ROI equation, investments. And let's add on amortized investments. Amortizing investments has two lenses to it, across time and across more surface area, more use cases. Now let's start with time. We've all seen hockey sticks before as we build out business cases, where you invest a lot up front and the promise of a return 3 to 5 years down the track. But no one has this patience anymore. We can't wait 3 to 5 years to see any value. And the best way to get started and deliver value quickly is to use out-of-the-box solutions and patterns. You might have seen this slide before in these past 2 days. This is how we think of the generative AI stack at AWS. And this top layer here is exactly this. It's out-of-the-box solutions to get you started on common use cases to get value quickly. About 2.5 years ago, the most common use case I was talking to customers about was internal assistance. Connect to your data, ask questions of your data, being able to converse with your data in natural language. And then in November 2023, we launched Amazon Q Business that is now available in Sydney. And that allows you to, in a couple of clicks, connect to over 40 source systems and to get that value in the hands of your employees and your people a lot faster. And for the developer experience, we have Amazon Q Developer, and we also have other partners and providers that play at this top layer. But in some cases, you might have a use case that is different, that is unique, where you need to invest to build out this differentiated value proposition for your people and for your customers. And that's where the bottom two layers come into play with the likes of Amazon Bedrock, SageMaker AI, and our infrastructure. The questions sometimes come, well, should I buy or should I build? And the answer is, it's a hybrid, it's both. You want to buy where appropriate, where you want to get to value faster, and you want to build where you have this differentiated capability. And we've been through this before. This is a very common technology question, but also in the context of other general purpose technologies like electricity. At first, some businesses were generating their electricity on site. But then we saw the advent of the grid, and that ended the era of bespoke generation. We could all leverage the grid. And today, if you look at your utility bill, every quarter, every month, you'll see a line item that says, broadly, transmission and distribution right. And that is to amortize the cost of the grid to every stakeholder that is involved, every customer, every business. Why? Because we can't expect the first customer, we can't expect our caveman that wants to light up the cave to bear the full cost of the grid, right? So we have to amortize it across everyone. And how did that happen over time? Well, usually through centralized funding, through state-owned or state-backed or regulated monopolies, because they were the best source of funding initially to help build that out and spread that out. So let's apply these insights to AI and to how you can amortize the cost of builds across your organizations. The first consideration is to categorize and allocate costs pragmatically. And there are two broad buckets of costs, indirect costs and direct costs. Indirect costs can be up to 70% of the total cost of a solution, quite significant. And these can be things like enablement, like security and risk, like change management. And for some of these buckets of cost, they are connected and tied to a specific use case. For example, change management, getting people to adopt a single tool for a single process for a single use case. Absolutely for one use case. However, there are also some of these indirect costs that are more generic in nature. For example, enablement. If we believe that AI will transform everything and transform how we work, you cannot expect the first use case in your organization to bear the full cost of training people and enabling people to think differently, to work differently. That has to be amortized across the entire organization, across more use cases, across more lines of businesses. And then we have direct costs, and that's a combination of build costs and ongoing run rate costs. For example, the cost of storing and processing data, as well as the model inference costs. So let's go over these build costs, and let's use as an example Acme Co. And let's say that they have a first use case, IT operations, just like Orion Health. And they come up with some high-level requirements for this use case. They need to connect to a lot of their enterprise internal context and knowledge. They need to bring that context to the model with the likes of retrieval augmented generation patterns. They need to implement monitoring for their solution and more. Up to 80% of those components, those requirements, those patterns can and should be reused. So let's look at the breakout as to how this can look like for this first use case. In the top section here in the white, you have costs that are allocated to this use case, specific to this use case, and so they are borne by this use case. But then below the line in dark pink here, we have these called platform costs that are reusable in nature. And so only a fraction of these should be allocated to our first use case, IT operations, in light pink here. Why? Because this is only the start of a journey, the first of many use cases. Let's say Acme Co then wants to transform their customer experience, just like NIB. They want to first understand the intents of customers as they reach out to the organization. They want to improve their customer service through deflection, through self-serve. They then want to hyper-personalize their outreach to their own customers. And each one of these use cases will have requirements that are both new to the company, but also existing, where they can leverage what has been built out over time. So over time, Acme Co will build out their platform, build out their maturity, and build out the comprehensiveness of their platform while delivering value along the way. What does that mean? Well, over time, the cost to deliver each solution will also come down. And so if you map out your use cases and the ROI, some will be ROI negative initially because you have a lot of components that aren't there. But as you build these out, the cost comes down and you can go after this long tail of use cases. And now finally, let's look at optimizing costs. And if you listen to a few sessions, you heard that one of the best practices is, well, costs are coming down. It's important to embed FinOps into your teams, both for cloud, but also for AI. The model inference costs can be as much as 80% of the cost of the solution, but it can also be only as little as 5 to 10%. So let's walk through this now and see how we can bring those down. If you use a foundation model on demand today, how do you calculate the cost? Well, it's very simply the cost per request multiplied by the number of requests. Pretty straightforward, right? And let's take as an example, you want to summarize 1,000 interactions or documents per day. So 1,000 requests and summaries per day. The cost per request is the combination of input costs and output costs. And we break these out because the cost per output and input token is different. Think of a token as about 75% of the length of a word, so roughly a word. The cost per input token is usually 3 to 5 times less than the cost per output token. So we split these two components out. And then we multiply the unit cost by the length of the input. Think of that as the prompt. If you ask a simple question, it's a shorter prompt, shorter input. If you pass in all of the document you want summarized, that's a longer prompt, longer input. So if we have 1,000 summaries daily, and each one is about 1,000 tokens, that's 1 million tokens per day in input and 100,000 tokens in output per day. Well, what's really important and interesting to highlight is the difference in cost between models, and it can be 2 to 3 orders of magnitude. 1 million input token can cost you $1 or tens of dollars, but it can also cost you as little as 1 cent. So what that means is summarizing one document can cost you a cent, or it can cost you a fraction of a cent. Massive orders of magnitude difference. And not only that, but as we saw, the cost of inference is also coming down very, very quickly. So if we think about optimizing model inference costs, there are 3 main levers. The first one, and the most obvious one, is picking the right foundation model. And that's where choice and flexibility is important, and that's available through Amazon Bedrock. Just like you don't want to get someone very experienced and senior doing a very junior task, you don't want a very powerful model with a lot of intelligence to handle a very simple task. You want a model that is just intelligent enough, no more, no less. So that's the first lever, and that can deliver you 2 to 3 orders of magnitude cost difference. The second one is around customizing this foundation model, where you want to pick a model that is smaller, that on the face of it cannot solve for your use case, but by refining it, by fine-tuning it, by using model distillation, you can cut that cost down and you can improve the performance on a more narrow, specific task. And that can reduce cost by up to 75% with minimal accuracy loss. And the last one is optimizing the application itself. And again, here you have a few different levers that are available in Amazon Bedrock. Take prompt routing. If you have questions that are of different complexity, you might pass a very simple question to a very basic model, and a more complex question that requires reasoning to a more powerful and more costly model. And with prompt routing, we can do this automatically, reducing costs by up to 30%. Or prompt caching. If you pass in the same input over and over again, we can cache that prompt, reducing costs by up to 90%. Then you also get latency gains. And finally, if you don't have any time-sensitive requirements for your use case, maybe you can use batch processing or batch inference. and that can cut the cost by half. So you can see here why sometimes I'm a bit surprised when I hear generative AI is very costly. You can gain orders of magnitude of cost by picking the right model. You can cut that by half with batch processing, and combining these approaches, you can get really, really low model inference costs. So what have we learned? What are the key takeaways? Well, number one, this is moving incredibly fast, and there's a lot of potential. And in this context, it's important to be bold on the vision, on the overall top-down value, but be flexible on the details. And a good way to do this is to learn by doing. Start with proven use cases with proven ROI, and build your way out to more complexity over time to show momentum within your business. To help with your business cases, you can consider benefits but also costs more holistically. And finally, this is a journey. You want to embed FinOps into your teams. You want to be able to leverage these different levers over time, use a new model that comes into play, and plug that into your application. We're here to help. Reach out to AWS, reach out to your account teams. To get started on those archetypes of use cases, you can check out the AI Launchpad that we launched, I believe, yesterday. And also, I would encourage you to upskill yourselves and upskill your teams with, for example, AWS Skill Builder. And so if I can close off by going back to this caveman analogy, we're on the cusp of something transformative. And I'm really grateful to be working with all of you here as part of this wave. And in this context, the question shouldn't be really whether to invest in AI, but how to do it wisely and effectively. Thank you very much.